I recently faced a parent's worst nightmare. The HOA president had my son snatched off our sidewalk, zip-tied, and shoved into an SUV. And her reason? She called it a community safety detention. Funny thing is, the only thing tested that night was my self-control to not knock her out. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Liam Sullivan. I'm a software architect, a man who deals in logic, in systems where every action has a predictable reaction. My life is built on clean code and quiet evenings with my wife, Olivia, and our son, Noah. Olivia is the district attorney. She's the one who deals with the messy, unpredictable parts of the world. I'm the calm one, the steady hand. At least, that's what I tell myself. But under the calm, there's always a storm waiting for the right conditions to form. Today, it made landfall. It started with a notification on my phone, a simple, automated alert from the family tracking app. Noah's phone tracking has been disabled. I stared at the message, a cold wire of dread tightening in my gut. He was supposed to be walking home from robotics club. A straight shot, 15 minutes tops. He always left his tracking on. It was our deal. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. That's when the second notification arrived. This one was from Olivia. A single, gut-punching text. Call me. 911. I was in the garage, trying to coax an old lawnmower back to life. The smell of gasoline and cut grass filled the air. Now, all I could smell was burnt wire panic. I dialed her number, my thumb shaking so badly I had to try twice. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice, usually so measured and confident, the voice that could command a courtroom, was thin and brittle. Liam, she said. Neighbor David just called. His security camera caught it. A black SUV. No plates, 2 men. They grabbed Noah. The world tilted on its axis. The lawn mower, the garage, the quiet suburban afternoon, it all just dissolved into a roaring white noise in my ears. Grabbed him? The words didn't compute. This is our community, a gated enclave of manicured lawns and faux Tuscan homes. It's supposed to be safe. That's why we pay the ridiculous HOA fees. That's why we put up with her, Brenda Lynch. Brenda, the HOA president. A woman who wielded her clipboard like a scepter and the bylaws like scripture. She was a failed police academy cadet who now ran our little corner of the world like a personal fiefdom. The 2 men, Olivia told me, were wearing vests that said community enforcement. I'd seen them before. Brenda's personal goon squad. Unlicensed, untrained security contractors who looked more like bouncers than peacekeepers. They were her muscle, the blunt instruments of her will. The connection clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Last week, Brenda had cornered me at the community mailbox. Her son, Ryan, a shy, anxious boy a year younger than Noah, had apparently told her that Noah was bullying him. She accused my son of psychological harassment and social terrorism, terms she'd clearly lifted from a bad television show. I knew it was a lie. Noah wouldn't hurt a fly. He spends his time building circuit boards and writing code for his battle bots. He's the kid who stops to help turtles cross the road. I defended him calmly, telling Brenda that there must be a misunderstanding. Noah had mentioned helping Ryan with a coding project. That was all. Brenda's eyes, small and hard, had narrowed. She had hissed, "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Sullivan. There are predators in this community, and I will root them out. I have a zero-tolerance policy." I had dismissed it as her usual brand of unhinged melodrama. I was wrong. It wasn't melodrama. It was a threat. She had greenlit this. This rogue queen, this petty dictator of the neighborhood, had ordered a kidnapping. My son. Her men had put their hands on my son. The calm voice I used to navigate the world vanished, consumed by the storm. I dropped the wrench I was holding. It clattered on the concrete floor, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed the snapping of my last nerve. "Where are you?" I asked Olivia, my voice a low growl I didn't recognize. 5 minutes out, she said. Stay put. But I couldn't stay put. The animal part of my brain, the part that exists for one reason and one reason only, to protect my child, was now in complete control. I walked out of the garage, leaving the door wide open, and stood in the driveway, scanning the perfect, tree-lined street that had just become a crime scene. They had taken our son, and they had no idea who they had just declared war on. The silence on our street was an insult, a pristine, sun-drenched lie. Just an hour ago, Noah had been walking along this very sidewalk, lost in the world of whatever podcast was playing through his headphones, probably thinking about gear ratios or soldering techniques. Now he was gone, vanished into the belly of an unmarked vehicle. My wife, Olivia, pulled into our driveway, her sleek sedan barely coming to a stop before she was out, phone already pressed to her ear. Her district attorney face was on, a mask of controlled fury, sharp and focused. But I could see the tremor in her hand, the frantic terror in her eyes that she was trying so hard to contain. She was a mother first, always. "I'm on with dispatch," she clipped, walking towards me. "They're putting out a bolo. But Liam, these guys are ghosts. Unregistered vehicle, burner phones most likely. They're not official." Olivia held out her hand. "Liam, keys." I blinked. She snapped twice the DA voice and I dropped the fob into her palm. I was already stepping off the curb. "Stop," she said, fingers hooked in my sleeve. "You don't run at shadows. You make them show you where the light is. Open the watch app. Mirror it to my dash." I hated that she was right. My knees still wanted to sprint. Down the block, a leaf blower droned. A man in a varsity hoodie glanced over. "Is this about the HOA inspection?" he called. "It's about kidnapping," I said, and he backed into his doorway like the word had teeth. Olivia slid behind the wheel. "Seatbelt. Talk me through the app. Breathe on the fours. Now." "In," I said. 2, 3, 4. The storm inside me fell in step with hers. She didn't need to tell me. Brenda Lynch operated in the murky space between the law and her own delusions of grandeur. "Neighbor David sent the file," I said, my voice tight. I held up my phone, showing her the grainy footage. There it was, my son, my lanky, sweet, harmless boy being manhandled by two burly men who looked like they'd be more at home breaking kneecaps than enforcing law and ordinance. They were efficient, professional in their brutality. They zip-tied his hands behind his back and pushed his head down as they shoved him into the SUV. He didn't even fight back. He was so stunned. He just disappeared. A wave of nausea washed over me. The helplessness was a physical poison spreading through my veins. "His tracker," Olivia said, her mind already jumping 3 steps ahead. "I know it's off," I replied. "He must have shut his phone down, or they did. Phone dead or disabled." "Fine." His watch beacon was ours now. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, we were perfectly in sync, a 2-person team against the world. "Exactly," she said, a flicker of strategy igniting in her gaze. "That cellular watch you got him has its own GPS chip harder to disable." My heart hammered against my ribs. Of course, the watch. I had insisted he wear it for this very reason, a backup for my own parental paranoia. I fumbled with my phone, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I pulled up the secondary tracking app, the one linked directly to the watch's emergency beacon. My breath hitched. A tiny blue dot was pulsing on the screen. It was moving, but not far. It was heading towards the old part of the development near the lake, where the original clubhouse stood before our current, ostentatious one was built. It was a derelict building slated for demolition for years, but the HOA, under Brenda's fiscal leadership, kept delaying it. It was their private kingdom, a place no one ever went. It used to be a utility substation. Brenda repurposed it without permits. Cameras wired in, coded locks, a steel bar across the inner door. "I've got him," I breathed, showing Olivia the screen. "He's at the old Northwood clubhouse." Olivia didn't hesitate. She was already back in her car, the engine rumbling to life. "Get in," she commanded. As I slid into the passenger seat, my own phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was neighbor David. "Liam," he said, his voice a nervous whisper. I didn't want to say anything with the police listening in, but I know those goons. They're part of Brenda's crew. They store their equipment at that old clubhouse. Mowers, security gear, everything. The confirmation sent a surge of ice-cold adrenaline through me. This was it. This was Brenda's black site. My son was being held captive in a glorified storage shed by a power-mad HOA president. Olivia pulled out of the driveway, tires squealing on the asphalt. Logic was useless now. I was a father, a protector, and the storm that had been brewing inside me was about to break. The blue dot on the screen was stationary now, blinking like a beacon, like a target, and we were heading straight for it. We weren't calling the local police to knock on the door. Olivia was already making another call, this time to someone much higher up the food chain. She was bypassing the front desk and going straight to the top. The rules of civilized society had been broken. Now, so would the rules of engagement. They had taken him off the street at dusk, and we were coming to get him back. The law was on its way, and we'd get there first to guide them in. The drive to the old clubhouse was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every red light, every stop sign felt like a personal affront, a barrier between me and my son. Olivia drove with a terrifying, focused calm, her hands steady on the wheel, but her knuckles were white. She was on the phone, not with the police, but with Judge Evans, a stern but fair woman she'd known for 20 years, catching her on her private cell as she was about to sit down for dinner. I could only hear Olivia's side of the conversation, a clipped, precise recitation of the facts. "Rebecca, it's Olivia Sullivan. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but it's an emergency. My son, Noah, has been abducted." "Yes, abducted. Unlawful restraint, at a minimum. We have video evidence and a GPS track. He's being held against his will at an unlicensed detention site by private contractors operating under the color of authority for a homeowners association." She paused, listening. "The HOA president, Brenda Lynch. We have a history of harassment. Yes, I have probable cause to believe he is in imminent danger. I need an emergency telephonic warrantful entry, search, and seizure for the Northwood Clubhouse property at 1 Old Lake Road. And I need the county sheriff's department to execute it, not local PD. I need a tactical team, Rebecca. Now." Local PD contracts with HOA vendors. Conflict risk noted in the affidavit. My wife wasn't a DA anymore. She was a weapon forged in the fires of the legal system, and she was aiming herself squarely at Brenda Lynch's heart. While she was securing the cavalry, my mind was racing, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Brenda. It was a highlight reel of petty tyranny. I remembered the first time we met her 5 years ago, shortly after we moved in. She'd shown up at our door with a tape measure and a binder of HOA bylaws, pointing out that our mailbox was 1/4 of an inch too low. 1/4 of an inch. I had laughed, thinking it was a joke. The look on her face, a pinched, joyless mask of indignation, told me it was not. She had no authority, not really. She was an elected volunteer, but she acted like she was the commander of a military base. She had tried to join the police force years ago, a fact she wasn't proud of, but that everyone knew. She washed out during the psychological evaluation. The rumor was that the psychologist's report used words like unstable, narcissistic, and a pathological need for control. Denied a real badge and a real gun. She had turned our peaceful community into her own private police state. Her community enforcement team was her masterpiece. 2 men, both with questionable histories, whom she paid an exorbitant salary to out of our HOA dues. They drove around in a black SUV fitted with illegal flashing amber lights, issuing fines for trash cans left out an hour too long or for children's toys visible from the street. They intimidated residents, profiled teenagers, and answered only to Brenda. She held court at the monthly HOA board meetings, which were less about community governance and more like show trials. I remembered one poor family, the Parkers, who wanted to build a small treehouse for their daughter. Brenda had publicly shamed them, using fabricated legal jargon about aerial sightline violations and unapproved vertical construction. She spoke about the bylaws as if they were ancient sacred texts, and she was their high priestess. The board, a collection of timid retirees and spineless yes-men, always voted her way. They were terrified of her. She had created a system of fear, and it worked. People paid their fines, painted their houses the approved shade of beige, and kept their heads down. And now she had escalated from mailboxes and treehouses to kidnapping. My son was a pawn in her sick power game. The false accusation of bullying against her son, Ryan, was just the pretext she needed. Ryan was a fragile kid, and I had no doubt Brenda's overbearing, suffocating brand of parenting was the primary cause. She probably twisted some innocent interaction between the boys into a sinister narrative that fit her worldview, a world where she was the last line of defense against chaos and decay. The blue dot on my phone was a tiny, pulsing star in a sea of darkness. It was our only guide. We turned onto Old Lake Road, the asphalt giving way to a cracked, weed-choked lane. The old clubhouse loomed ahead, a dark, hulking shape against the twilight sky. The windows were boarded up, the paint was peeling, but a single bare bulb burned over a side entrance, and parked right next to it was a black SUV with no plates. "They're here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Olivia hung up the phone. "The warrant is signed," she said, her voice like steel. "The sheriff's ERT is 10 minutes out." Hayes's unit was staging nearby. The sheriff's substation sits 4 miles out on County 12. 10 minutes was real. Judge Evans issued it telephonically and emailed the signed PDF to Hayes's unit for on-scene confirmation. She looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine. "We are not going in there alone, Leah. We wait for the professionals." I nodded, but every fiber of my being screamed to kick that door down and tear the place apart with my bare hand. The storm inside me was a Category 5 hurricane, and waiting was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. The waiting was a special kind of hell. 10 minutes can feel like a lifetime when your child is on the other side of a locked door with criminals. We parked our car down the road, out of sight, the engine off. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Olivia was on her phone again, this time coordinating with the sheriff's tactical commander, feeding him the layout of the property from memory. She'd already pushed the ring clip and GPS pin to Hayes. His team was rolling in dark, dash cams hot, 10 minutes behind us. I just stared at the building, my imagination running wild with terrifying possibilities. What were they doing to him? Was he scared? Was he hurt? The need to act, to do something, was a physical ache. My hands clenched and unclenched on my lap. I felt like a caged animal. When Noah was 6 and the sky broke itself over our roof, he built a blanket fort in the hallway and refused to come out. I crawled in with a flashlight between my teeth and taught him our thunder code. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. That means I'm right here, I told him. We practiced on the wall, the floor, the underside of the coffee table, until he giggled. At 2 a.m., the ice maker clanked. He hammered back. I tapped the code through the drywall from our room. It wasn't bravery, just a promise with a rhythm. Sitting in that car now, every muscle wanted to break the rhythm. I wrapped my hand around the door handle and made myself wait for the knocks. And then, a different kind of alert lit up my screen. An email notification. Emergency HOA board meeting. Urgent matter of community security. It was scheduled for right now. A virtual meeting. Brenda was broadcasting from inside that building. Headlights swept the trees and died. A black golf cart nosed out of the service path, one of Brenda's guys at the wheel, a handheld light slashing the ditch. Olivia shoved my head down. We slid lower in the seats until the beam passed. The cart idled, listening. Somewhere to our left, a radio squawked. Neighbor David on his old ham. Breaker 1. Is this the chili cook-off? Over. The cart jerked away, annoyed. Olivia exhaled. We are not heroes tonight, she said. We are smart. She popped the glove box and handed me Noah's spare watch band. Tap SOS 3 times if you hear him. He knows the code. I typed our family phrase, knock 3, into the watch app. 10 long seconds. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. Watch ACK. On Brenda's laptop feed, a faint rap bled into the mic. A board member frowned. What was that? Pipes, Brenda snapped. But I felt it in my ribs. My kid was alive, thinking, waiting for a door. I tapped join. Brenda filled the screen, jaw tight, eyes lit with power. The board squares flickered. Frank Parker leaned in too close to his webcam. A tabby tail kept swiping his lens. Madam President, Frank tried. Article 11 is for storms and downed trees, not detaining children. Brenda's smile didn't reach her eyes. Frank, you lack the training to assess threats. A new square popped in. Treasurer Martinez, breathless. I never approved detentions, Brenda. Our insurance. Our mandate is clear, she snapped. Community enforcement will hold the subject until I certify a corrective plan. You mean a kid? Frank said, voice firmer. You're talking about a kid. Brenda stared into the camera like it was a mirror. Words matter. He is a subject presenting ongoing risk. From another box, a voice. You're not muted. Brenda blinked, then forced a laugh. Good. Let the record stand. I hit screen record. Olivia whispered, perfect. She just made our case. I stayed muted and kept recording while she monologued, building our evidence in real time. She's insane. Olivia breathed next to me, her eyes glued to my phone. She's created her own little police state with its own laws and its own jail. The secure HOA facility, the processing. This wasn't just a mistake or an overreaction. It was a calculated, premeditated act. She had built this system piece by piece, waiting for the moment to use it, and Noah was her test case. I could feel the vibrations before I could hear the sound, a low, rhythmic thrumming that grew steadily louder. A pair of headlights appeared at the end of the road, then another, and another. Not the gentle glow of sedans, but the bright, intense beams of heavy-duty vehicles. The sheriff's emergency response team had arrived. They were rolling in, silent and dark, a column of black armored trucks and patrol cruisers killing their lights as they got closer. The cavalry was here. The show trial on my phone screen was about to be interrupted by a very real dose of law and order. Brenda's voice was still droning on about protocols and procedures, completely oblivious. The self-proclaimed guardian of our community had no idea that the real guardians were about to breach her fortress walls, and I was going to have a front row seat. The arrival of the sheriff's team was like watching a silent, deadly ballet. Armored trucks, black as midnight, glided to a stop, disgorging a dozen officers clad in tactical gear. They moved with a fluid, disciplined purpose that made Brenda's community enforcement goons look like clumsy children playing dress-up. The commander, a big man with a calm, authoritative presence named Sergeant Hayes, met us by our car. Olivia stepped out to meet him, not just a mother now, but an officer of the court, calm and precise. She handed him a tablet with the signed warrant. "Sergeant," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "The subject, Brenda Lynch, is the HOA president. She's currently broadcasting a video conference from inside. We believe she's in a utility room on the east side of the building. My son, Noah Sullivan, age 14, is being held somewhere on the premises. He is the priority. We need him out safe and sound." Hayes nodded, his eyes quickly scanning the building. "We'll establish a perimeter first, then make a call for a peaceful surrender. If she doesn't comply, we go in." My stomach twisted into a knot. A peaceful surrender from Brenda Lynch, the woman who argued for 10 minutes about the legally mandated distance between daffodils? It wasn't in her nature to yield. Every instinct I had told me this was going to get ugly. Olivia, however, was already planning her next move. While the tactical team fanned out, creating an impenetrable ring around the old clubhouse, she was back on the phone. This time, it wasn't a judge or a police commander. It was a reporter from the city's biggest news channel, a trusted contact she'd worked with for years. "Chris, it's Olivia Sullivan," she said, her voice low. "I've got a story for you in exclusive, but you have to move fast. Get a camera crew to 1 Old Lake Road right now. Stage at the church lot 2 blocks west. Do not approach until the sheriff's PIO clears it. An HOA president is operating a rogue security force and has illegally detained a minor. Yes, my son. The county sheriff's ERT is en route to execute a warrant." She was lighting a fire, but she was also controlling the narrative. She knew Brenda would try to spin this, to paint herself as the victim of an overzealous government. Olivia was making sure the truth got out first, raw and unfiltered. As the deputies took up their positions, a sudden, jarringly loud voice erupted from a bullhorn, shattering the evening quiet. "This is the county sheriff's department. We have a warrant to search this facility. Brenda Lynch, you are ordered to exit the building with your hands in the air." A moment of silence followed. On my phone, the Zoom meeting was still live. I saw Brenda's head jerk up, her eyes wide with disbelief, then fury. She heard it. The other board members looked bewildered. "What was that?" one of them asked. Brenda's face hardened into a mask of defiance. "It appears we are being subjected to an unlawful intrusion," she announced to the board, her voice trembling with rage. "This is a clear case of government overreach, an attempt to intimidate a private community organization. Do not worry. I have this under control. Our enforcement officers are on site." Suddenly, the side door of the clubhouse flew open. Brenda's 2 goons, the same men who had grabbed Noah, stepped out. They were wearing their ridiculous tactical vests and carrying pepperball launchers dressed up with rails and fake mags to look like rifles. They stood there, puffing out their chests, trying to look imposing. It would have been comical if my son weren't inside. "You are trespassing on private property," one of them yelled, his voice cracking. "You have no jurisdiction here." Sergeant Hayes's voice boomed back through the bullhorn, laced with an icy calm that promised no room for negotiation. "Put the weapons down now. You are interfering with the execution of a legal warrant." For a tense few seconds, nobody moved. The 2 men looked at each other, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They were bullies, not soldiers. They were used to intimidating retirees about lawn care, not facing down a dozen heavily armed sheriff's deputies. Then Brenda's voice shrieked from inside the building. "Do not stand down. Defend our property. That's an order." It was the push they needed, the command from their queen. One of them raised his fake rifle. It was the stupidest, most predictable mistake he could have made. In an instant, the night exploded with action. The deputies deployed a flashbang grenade. Less lethal or not, look-alike long guns are treated as a high-risk threat under department policy. A blinding white light and a deafening concussion ripped through the air. The 2 goons crumpled to the ground, disoriented, clutching their ears. Before they could even recover, deputies were on them, disarming them and cuffing them with brutal efficiency. The path to the door was clear. Sergeant Hayes gave the signal. Breach, breach, breach. A battering ram slammed against the side door, splintering the wood. The deputies flooded into the building. A deputy's gloved fist rapped twice. Another answered from inside with 3 short knocks. Hallway right, clear. A voice barked over the radio. Utility closet barricaded. Child voice behind door. My legs moved on their own. Hayes's forearm barred my chest. Let us work, Dad. I froze, shaking. Then I heard it. 3 light taps from deep in the building. Pause. 3 more. Our old family code from when Noah was little and scared of storms. That's him, I said. That's my boy. Copy. Came a calm reply. Contact through door. Kid responds. A pry bar bit metal. Hinges screamed. Hands. Hands, someone shouted. Then softer. You're okay, buddy. Stay still. Brenda's voice crackled from the laptop feed, rising to a shriek about authority and mandate, completely drowned by the real cadence of a rescue. Room secure. 1 juvenile located. No visible injuries. My breath came back like air after a dive. Radios beat her voice. Rooms clearing, doors pried, a kid answering. I pressed my palms to the hood and breathed. As the tactical teams swarmed the building, the world seemed to slow down. The sounds were muffled. Shouts from the deputies, a crash from inside. Brenda's distant, enraged shrieking. All I could think about was Noah. Was he okay? Was he caught in the middle of this chaos? Olivia stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm, her knuckles digging into my skin. We were both frozen, spectators at the most important event of our lives. A deputy emerged from the breached doorway, speaking into his radio. We have the primary subject, Brenda Lynch, in custody. She is not being cooperative. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. Of course, she wasn't. Cooperation is for people who believe they are subject to the same rules as everyone else. In Brenda's mind, she was the rules. 2 more deputies appeared, dragging her 2 henchmen out. Their tough guy facades had crumbled completely. They looked like what they were, scared, pathetic men who had made a terrible mistake. Then, Sergeant Hayes's voice came over the radio, clear and calm. We have the boy. He's safe. He's in a back office, physically unharmed. Relief washed over me with such force my knees nearly buckled. Olivia let out a sob, a raw, ragged sound of pure, unadulterated relief. He was safe. Our son was safe. The rest was just noise. A moment later, a deputy walked out of the building, and beside him, looking small and overwhelmed, was Noah, my son. His hoodie was rumpled and his face was pale, but he was walking on his own. He looked up, his eyes scanning the chaos of flashing lights and armed men. And then he saw us. The look on his face, a mixture of fear, confusion, and overwhelming relief, broke my heart and stitched it back together all at once. We both ran to him, ignoring the deputies, trying to keep the scene secure. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him so tight I could feel his heart beating against my chest. He felt so fragile. Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know what was happening. I know, buddy. I know. We're here now. You're safe, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Olivia was stroking his hair, her tears falling freely now. We've got you, Noah. We've got you. As we held him, a commotion erupted from the doorway. 2 deputies were half carrying, half dragging a screaming Brenda Lynch out into the night. Her hair was a mess, her face contorted in a mask of pure fury, and she was fighting them every step of the way. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice echoing across the property. I am the president of this association. I was protecting my community. He was a threat. I have bylaws. I have authority. She sounded completely unhinged, a dictator watching her statue being toppled in the town square. Her eyes, wild and frantic, landed on us, standing there with Noah. A new wave of venom entered her voice. You see, she screamed, pointing a finger at Olivia. This is corruption. She's using her office to protect her criminal son. This is a conspiracy. Sergeant Hayes walked over to her, his expression weary. Brenda Lynch, he said, his voice cutting through her tirade. You're under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Hayes glanced to a deputy. Add impersonating a peace officer, theft by taking, and unlawful use of emergency warning lights. Her mouth snapped shut, but only for a second. Kidnapping? That's ridiculous. It was a community detention. A civic action, she yelled as the deputies guided her toward a patrol car. As they pushed her head down to get her into the back seat, she let out one last desperate cry that seemed to be aimed at the whole world. I was saving you all. I was keeping you safe. The car door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The self-appointed queen of our neighborhood was in the back of a police car, her reign of terror over. The flashing lights painted the scene in strobing blues and reds. The news van Olivia had called was pulling up, its camera already pointed our way. A deputy waved the perimeter open. The PIO had just cleared media staging. A reporter hustled toward the tape. Mr. Sullivan, can you? Negative. Hayes called without looking up. Pijo only. Olivia stepped to the line, cool and clipped. We'll speak after medical clears our son. From the sidewalk, Frank Parker, still on his Zoom, phone in hand, lifted a shaky thumb. Point of order, Brenda, he said to his screen. You're fired. Somewhere in the patrol lights, Brenda thrashed against the cuffs and tried one more sermon. Without me, there's chaos. Neighbor David, still in an apron, cupped his hands. Lady, you are the chaos. Even a deputy huffed a laugh before schooling his face. Hayes turned to his team. Catalog the weapons, copy the camera drives, lock the vehicle, scene control, then PDO. I pulled Noah closer. His heartbeat was steady now. Mine finally matched it. It was over. But as I held my son, I knew the damage had been done. They hadn't just taken him for a few hours. They had stolen his sense of safety, his belief that the world was a logical, predictable place. They had shown him the monster that can lurk behind a neighbor's smile. And for that, there was no easy fix. The hours after we brought Noah home were a blur of police statements, medical checks, and quiet, shell-shocked reassurances. He was physically fine, just a few scrapes and some chafing on his wrists from the zip ties. Emotionally, he was a wreck. He sat on the sofa wrapped in a blanket, staring into space, a plate of his favorite food untouched on the coffee table. He would flinch at every unexpected noise. The fortress of security we had built around his childhood had been breached. While Olivia was on the phone with the lead prosecutor, outlining the mountain of charges they were filing against Brenda and her crew, I sat with Noah. I didn't push him to talk. I just sat there, a silent, solid presence, letting him know he wasn't alone. As I watched him, my mind drifted back, connecting the dots of Brenda's madness that had been laid out piece by piece over the years. This wasn't a sudden break from reality. It was the culmination of a long, slow descent. I remembered a community barbecue 2 summers ago. It was a hot, lazy Saturday, and the whole neighborhood was out. My friend, neighbor David, was manning the grill. Brenda Lynch, of course, wasn't enjoying the party. She was policing it. She had a clipboard and was taking notes. She approached David, her lips pursed in disapproval. David, she said loud enough for everyone to hear, your grill is emitting an unacceptable amount of smoke. According to County Fire Code 307.1, recreational fires must be at least 25 feet from a structure. David, a retired firefighter, just looked at her. Brenda, he said patiently, this is a propane grill, not a recreational fire, and we're 50 feet from the nearest house. We're fine. Brenda's face flushed. She hated being contradicted, especially by someone with actual expertise. I am the final arbiter of community safety, she snapped. I'm issuing you a formal warning. She scribbled on her clipboard and thrust the paper at him. He just laughed and went back to flipping burgers. We all dismissed it as Brenda being Brenda. We shouldn't have. It was a clear sign of her desperate need for an authority she hadn't earned and didn't possess. She wasn't just a stickler for rules. She believed she was the law. Then there was the incident with the security cameras. A year ago, she proposed a new initiative at an HOA meeting, a network of HOA-owned surveillance cameras covering all public area parks, streets, sidewalks. She claimed it was for security. Many of us, myself included, raised privacy concerns. We didn't want to live in a fishbowl. She steamrolled the opposition using fear tactics. She spoke of unknown elements and transient threats, making our quiet suburbs sound like a war zone. The measure passed, barely. What we didn't know until later was where the money was coming from. She had diverted funds from the road maintenance and landscaping budgets to pay for her surveillance state. The potholes on our streets got deeper and the communal gardens withered, but Brenda had her eyes in the sky. She would sit in her home office, which she called the command center, and watch the feeds for hours, looking for infractions. It was her own personal panopticon. Her obsession with control extended to people, too, especially her son, Ryan. I saw it firsthand. At a school science fair, Noah had his robotics project on display. Ryan had a volcano made of papier-mâché. It was a decent project, but when the judges passed him over for a prize, he started to cry. Brenda didn't comfort him. She marched over to the judges, a science teacher, and the principal, and demanded a recount. She accused them of bias, of not understanding the geological complexities of his model. She made a scene, humiliating her own son in a misguided attempt to protect him from the slightest disappointment. She couldn't accept that the world didn't bend to her will, and she was teaching her son that he shouldn't have to either. This was the pattern. Every action, every decision was about asserting control in a world that had once told her she wasn't good enough to wear a real badge. Her failure at the police academy wasn't just a biographical footnote. It was her origin story. It was the wound that never healed. And she spent every day trying to prove that long-ago psychologist wrong. She couldn't be a cop, so she became a queen, and our neighborhood became her kingdom. We had all seen the warning signs. We had tolerated the petty decrees and the public rants. We had enabled her, in a way, by choosing inaction over confrontation. We never thought she would go this far. But a tyrant, if left unchecked, will always escalate. Tonight, her escalation had finally met an immovable object, a mother's love and a father's rage. The kingdom was finally falling. The day after the arrest, Olivia and I, along with 2 detectives from the sheriff's department, walked through the old clubhouse. The place was a monument to Brenda Lynch's paranoia. What neighbor David had described as a storage facility was so much more. It was a command center, a surveillance hub, and an evidence locker for her imaginary police force. The main room was filled with lawn equipment, as expected, but a back office, the one where they'd held Noah, had been converted into Brenda's personal war room. A massive corkboard covered one wall, connected by a spiderweb of red yarn. It looked like something out of a detective movie, except the subjects weren't criminals. They were her neighbors. There were photos of residents printed from her network of surveillance cameras. My family was on there. The Parkers were on there. Neighbor David was on there. Next to each photo were handwritten notes detailing perceived infractions and personal habits. Liam Sullivan, hostile attitude, possible subversive tendencies. Son is a known associate of troubled youth, Ryan Lynch. She had twisted Noah's kindness into a criminal conspiracy. The detectives began methodically bagging and tagging evidence. One of them whistled as he opened a large filing cabinet. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Olivia and I walked over. The cabinet was filled top to bottom with meticulously organized files, one for nearly every family in the community. It was a targeted profiling system of stunning detail. The files contained everything: photos of our cars and license plates, printouts of our social media pages, records of every HOA violation notice she'd ever issued, and her own speculative notes about our finances, our jobs, and our personal lives. It was a stalker's diary masquerading as official records. My hands clenched into fists as I saw our file. She had a picture of Noah getting on the school bus, a picture of Olivia leaving for work, a picture of me gardening. It was a nauseating violation of our privacy. She had been watching us, all of us, for years. But the real bombshell was on her computer. A forensic tech was working on her laptop, the same one she'd used for the Zoom meeting. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Olivia, "you need to see the financials." On the screen was a spreadsheet detailing the HOA's budget. It was a labyrinth of shell accounts and mislabeled expenditures. The exorbitant fees she was paying her 2 enforcement officers were just the beginning. She had used HOA funds, our money to buy the illegal surveillance equipment, the blacked-out SUV, tactical gear, and even a subscription to a private background check service. Tens of thousands of dollars diverted from community upkeep to fund her private army. It was embezzlement, plain and simple, on a grand scale. She wasn't just a wannabe cop. She was a white-collar criminal using the HOA charter as a cover for her own private slush fund. "This is it," Olivia said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "This is what blows the whole thing wide open. It's not just kidnapping. It's fraud, illegal surveillance, misappropriation of funds, a pattern of racketeering. She was running the HOA like a criminal enterprise. The evidence was overwhelming, a treasure trove of her own compulsive record-keeping, her pathological need for control. The very thing that made her a tyrant was also what was going to guarantee her conviction. She had documented her own crimes with a bookkeeper's precision. As we stood there, surrounded by the evidence of her madness, my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the other parents at school. "Is Noah okay? Ryan Lynch just had a total breakdown in the counselor's office. He's telling them everything." My blood ran cold. Ryan, the boy at the center of all this, the supposed victim. He was finally breaking his silence. The foundation of Brenda's entire justification, the lie that started this whole nightmare, was about to be demolished not by a lawyer or a detective, but by her own son. The truth was coming out, and it was going to be more devastating for Brenda than any financial audit could ever be. We met with the school principal and a child psychologist later that afternoon. Ryan Lynch's father, a quiet, browbeaten man who always seemed to be walking on eggshells around his wife, was there, looking lost and distraught. They told us what happened. Ryan had come to school that morning, a bundle of nerves. When he heard the rumors about Noah being taken and his mother being arrested, he had completely fallen apart. In a torrent of tears and gut-wrenching sobs, he told the school counselor the truth. It wasn't just that Noah hadn't bullied him. It was the complete opposite. Noah had been helping him. Ryan, it turned out, was being relentlessly bullied by a group of older kids at school. They mocked him for being awkward, for his nervous tics, for his interest in things they deemed nerdy. They would corner him, steal his lunch money, and call him names. He was too terrified to tell his parents, especially his mother. He knew she wouldn't handle it with compassion. She would handle it like a military operation, making everything 1,000 times worse. Noah had seen it happening. My son, my quiet, introverted boy who usually kept to himself, had stepped in. He didn't fight them. That's not his way. He used his brain. He found one of the bullies trying to cheat on a coding assignment, and instead of reporting him, he offered to tutor him on the condition that they leave Ryan alone. It worked. The bullying stopped. Afterwards, Noah started spending time with Ryan, helping him with his own coding projects, trying to build up his confidence. He was being a friend, a protector, in the only way he knew how. He was doing what was right. When Brenda had found them working together in our garage, she had interrogated her son, demanding to know what they were doing. Ryan, terrified of his mother's explosive reactions, had stammered and couldn't explain properly. Brenda, with her mind already poisoned by paranoia, saw not a friendship, but a conspiracy. She saw my son, confident and capable, and her son, anxious and fragile, and she twisted the narrative to fit her worldview. In her mind, Noah had to be the aggressor, the predator. She had badgered and manipulated her son, putting words in his mouth until the terrified boy finally broke down and told her what she wanted to hear. The story of Noah the bully was a complete fabrication born from a mother's pathological need to see her son as a perpetual victim and herself as his only savior. Hearing this, a wave of pride washed over me, so fierce and powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. In the middle of this whole ugly mess, my son had been a hero. He had stood up for someone who needed help, and he had done it with kindness and intelligence, not with fists. He hadn't told us because he didn't want to worry us, and he didn't want to betray Ryan's trust. He was a good kid with a heart bigger and stronger than I ever knew. This revelation changed everything. It wasn't just about Brenda's crimes anymore. It was about my son's innocence. The core premise of her entire insane justification was not just wrong. It was the polar opposite of the truth. When we got home, I found Noah in his room, tinkering with a circuit board, his hands finally steady again. I sat down on his bed and told him what Ryan had said. I told him that we knew everything and that we were so proud of him. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. I was just trying to help, he said, his voice small. I know, I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. And you did. You were brave and you were kind, and that's more important than anything else. For the first time since the abduction, I saw the tension leave his body. A small, real smile touched his lips. The truth was out. The lie had been exposed. Brenda Lynch hadn't just kidnapped a community threat. She had kidnapped a hero. And now the whole world was going to know it. Brenda Lynch's arraignment was a media circus. The news van Olivia had called had done its job, and the story had exploded. HOA president creates private police force. Kidnaps teenager was a headline that was too sensational to ignore. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious neighbors, and the families of Brenda's other victims, the people she had fined, harassed, and surveilled for years. They were there to see the queen deposed. Olivia wasn't prosecuting the case herself, of course. That would be a conflict of interest. She had handed it off to the most ruthless prosecutor in her office, a man who took a special delight in dismantling arrogant bullies. But she was there, sitting in the front row with me and Noah. We were there to bear witness, to see this through to the end. When they brought Brenda in, she looked smaller, diminished, stripped of her clipboard, her tactical vest, and her air of authority. She was just a middle-aged woman in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. But the defiance was still there, burning in her eyes. She scanned the courtroom, her gaze settling on her husband, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, and then on us. She shot us a look of pure, undiluted hatred. With her accounts frozen and the board in collapse, her court-appointed attorney, a smarmy, overworked public defender, entered a plea of not guilty. The judge began to read the list of charges: kidnapping in the first degree, false imprisonment of a minor, conspiracy, racketeering, felony theft, illegal surveillance. The list went on and on. With each charge, a ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. The sheer scope of her crimes was staggering. Then came the bail hearing. Her lawyer argued for a low bail, painting her as a dedicated community volunteer with no prior record, a pillar of society who simply overstepped her bounds. The prosecutor stood up, a grim smile on his face. "Your Honor," he began, "Ms. Lynch is not a pillar of the community. She was its jailer. She did not overstep her bounds. She created her own tyrannical nation-state in a gated community. She used the dues of her neighbors to fund a private, unlicensed security force to harass and intimidate them. She conducted illegal surveillance and compiled dossiers on them like a secret police agent. And when her delusions reached their peak, she ordered the armed abduction of a 14-year-old boy, not because he was a threat, but because he showed kindness to her son." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The state has video evidence of the abduction. We have the testimony of her own son, who has confessed that the victim was, in fact, his protector. We have financial records proving widespread embezzlement. Ms. Lynch is a flight risk, a danger to the community, and she has shown a complete and utter contempt for the rule of law. The state requests that bail be denied." The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she'd seen it all, stared down at Brenda over her glasses. "Bail is denied," she said, her voice flat and final. "The defendant will be remanded in custody until trial." That's when Brenda finally broke. The last vestige of her composure shattered. She lunged forward, her hands slamming on the defendant's table. "No," she shrieked, her voice raw and cracking. "This is a mistake. You don't understand. I was protecting them. There are rules. Without rules, there is chaos. I was the only one strong enough to enforce them. I was saving the community." Two bailiffs moved in, grabbing her arms. She struggled against them, her face red, tears of rage streaming down her cheeks. "You're all weak," she screamed at the gallery, at the judge, at the world. "You want to live in filth and disorder. I brought order. I brought safety. I did what had to be done." They dragged her, kicking and screaming, from the courtroom. Her cries echoed in the hallway before being silenced by a closing door. A profound silence fell over the courtroom. The show was over. The tyrant had been dethroned, not in a blaze of glory, but in a pathetic, desperate tantrum. She wasn't a fallen hero. She was just a broken person, so consumed by her need for control that she had lost touch with reality. I looked over at Noah. He had watched the entire spectacle with a quiet, somber expression. He wasn't gloating. He just looked sad. He saw what I saw, not a monster, but a deeply unhappy woman who would cause so much pain because of her own. I put my arm around him. "It's over now, son," I whispered. We stood up and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the mess of Brenda Lynch's shattered life behind us. We had our family back. We had justice. Now it was time to start healing. Outside the courtroom, Ryan's father stood by the water fountain, twisting his wedding band until it flashed like a warning light. He drifted toward us and stopped 2 feet short. I'm sorry," he said to the carpet, "for not stopping her, for not believing my kid. He wants to apologize himself, but we can't discuss the case," Olivia said gently. "But your cooperation matters, for Ryan, too." He nodded, eyes bright. I gave the detectives her passwords, the storage unit lease. "Whatever you need." He swallowed. "And tell your boy, Ryan says thank you, for the robot code, and for the cafeteria thing." "What cafeteria thing?" I asked. "He told those kids to back off," the man said. "Volcanoes take time to erupt." He almost smiled. He made it sound cool. When he left, Noah squeezed my hand without looking up. A quiet, grateful pressure. A different kind of verdict. The weeks after Brenda's arraignment were a strange mix of relief and unease. The HOA imploded. Board resignations, audits, headlines. But the bigger battle was at home. Noah was quiet, jumpy, sleeping light. Monsters didn't have fangs. They carried clipboards. Therapy helped. Time helped. Then a month later, He asked to speak at a student-led assembly on safety and rights. Part of me wanted to say no. Let him hide in robotics and solder smoke. But this was his story, his choice. Are you sure? I asked. I have to, he said. If I don't, she wins. The auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, parents, a couple of cameras. Under the lights, he looked small, but his voice carried. Hi, I'm Noah Sullivan. You've seen my name. A few weeks ago, 2 men took me and locked me in a room. Their boss made up a story that I was a bully. She was wrong. He paused, breathing steady. She got away with it because people were scared to question her. She used big words and fake rules to sound official. She took my rights because she thought no one would notice. He found me in the crowd. I nodded once. What happened to me was extreme, he said. But it starts small. Unfair fines, rules that don't make sense, people in charge who won't listen. That happens in schools and neighborhoods. He unfolded a slip of paper. Know this. You can ask for ID if someone claims authority. You can choose not to answer questions. You can record in public. You can say no. His voice, once shaky, was clear now. My dad builds systems. He says a system is only as good as its rules. Our community is a system. The rules should protect everyone, not just give power to one person. Know the rules. Know your rights. That's how we stop this from happening again. For a heartbeat, silence. Then one clap. Then another, until the room was on its feet. Olivia crushed my hand and cried. I let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. Noah stepped off the stage into a wave of kids thanking him, teachers nodding, parents wiping their eyes. He wasn't a headline anymore. He wasn't a victim. He was a voice. Outside, the afternoon felt lighter. The HOA would rebuild under adults who remembered what authority is for. The audits would finish. The court would do its work. At home, Noah set his folded speech on the table. 3 words were underlined twice. Know your rights. Brenda had tried to make an example out of my son. She did, just not the one she wanted. She showed a whole town what happens when power goes unchecked. He showed them something stronger, calm, courage, and a kid who chose to stand up. The storm passed. The damage is real, but my son is still hair steadier, louder, somehow bigger than before.